Ambarish.
Good evening, Julie and all the members and attendees. Love in our time, the name of today's session. Love in the time of COVID, maybe. It may be borrowing the name from the book of Gabriel Garcia Marquez, but not exactly the story. Because the story that today our library committee, and in particular Dr. Julie Mehta curated, is not a fiction, but a real life story and compilation of various stories and anecdotes, stretching actually the prevalent concept of the bilateral relationship between two individuals and making it transcend beyond two individuals to a much bigger canvas. A love expressed by a group of people belonging to a very noble profession, to the medical profession, some of whom will be here with us today, and requited by the beneficiary of that service and love through the gratitude, and maybe in the form of today's event also, and in many other various forms of gratitude, which are the patients or who suffered during these times. The anecdotes today will depict such stories and how we all lived during the time, and how the bondage, how the binding between the medical professionals and also the patients or people like us who suffered directly or indirectly during that time, that will depict such stories of such bindings. I welcome you all to this unique event on the auspices of the Valentine Day and the month, which is commemorating love, but love in a different meaning, love with a different twist. And I particularly thank Dr. Julie Mehta for really thinking upon this very interesting concept and also curating this event. Dr. Julie Mehta needs no introduction. I mean, Calcutta is where she was born up, and he considers Bengal Club as her second home. And I say not just second home, she may be considering it as her first home. A doctorate from the University of Toronto, a very revered professor in Loreto, and a very strong academician, a very respected individual. And I am really thanking Dr. Julie Mehta and his colleagues in the library committee, and the chair of the library committee, Dr. Shondeep Chatterjee, for really providing or presenting this interesting topic. Welcoming all members and wishing that this evening really be very interesting for you. Over to you, Dr. Mehta.
Thank you, Ambarish. As usual, you hit it spot on. You said what this is about better than I could say it. Although I've been thinking about this, mulling over this for a very long time, actually. The ideation for love in our time has been brooding within me ever since I lost a dear friend, Anjana Ghosh, a member of the Bengal Club, to Corona. She was my buddy, and we were schoolmates from Loreto House. But more to the urgency of the geography and the history of this evening, ever since my return from Toronto to look after our mother, Dr. Onima, 92 years old at that time and diagnosed for dementia because my father was no more, it was at the Reynolds room here at the Bengal Club that Anjana Mukherjee Ghosh and I met twice a week after she finished her day as principal of the Oxford Mission School and I teaching at Loreto next door. For 3 years, we shared stories of growing up, the years before we reacquainted, the years in between. And then very suddenly, from March 2020, we stopped meeting. Harish and I decided to self-isolate when Corona was a new visitor to town. Most unfortunately, I stopped coming to Bengal Club. Anjana and I lost touch. Then on April 19th, 2021, she was admitted to hospital for minute strokes. On May 1st, 2021, for the first time in the hospital, she tested positive for Corona. Then on May 14th, 2021, Anjana left without any goodbyes. Her husband Amol, son Udit, could not see her at the last. Mortal remains were left for others to take care of. Contagion and containment was legislated for Anjana and nearly 6 million others still today. Now, we at the Bengal Club are celebrating love in our times that is marked by innovative and inventive ways that all of us here have given or received love and are trying so hard to adjust to a new normative. Gurudash, may we have the PowerPoint presentation first slide, please? So this evening, as I began to speak to people who would take part today in conversation and share their stories, as President Ambarish Dasgupta put it so well, the real stories, the anecdotes. One that came to sit on my heart was another school friend of ours, Shormishtha Shen Naudas, saying that Obhik Shen, her brother, whom some of you might know, his last words texted to her was, "I'm gasping for air." Then I heard from a friend in Toronto who said the first thing her daughter asked was, "Mum, when will you come home?" as a healthcare worker. Most recently, Dr. Shondeep Chatterjee, the chair of our library committee, despite my persuasion, fought shy to come and be seen. So he sent a poem. And when I read and I heard him recite the poem, which we will share today, it made me think that it would be worthwhile to have this conversation with all of us. Selecting the members of this panel today has been a felicitous task, though I'm sorry we could not accommodate many others. Let me get all of us acquainted with our luminaries. I have tried to incorporate some of their proclivities towards being human rather than just their degrees. Thrilled that we have 3 doctors on board, all Bengal Club members and all renowned in their fields. Dr. Nandini Rai, Director, Proprietor of Radiant Eye Foundation, Senior Consultant, Ophthalmologist, Fortis Eye Clinic, Specialist in Laser Cataract Surgery, enjoys making surgical videos, dabbling in cooking, traveling, reading. She's pragmatic as long as I've known her, and her elder sister, Ratnabali Kakkar. And she is closely aligned to her family, to her children, both of whom are doctors. And of course, the common ground for us is that she's very close to her mother, who's in her 80s and keeps a close watch on her. Mr. Pradeep Guptu had a very close encounter with Corona. I can't wait for us to hear what he has to say. Now he says every day is a new day with a new job, and that's fabulous, he says. I'm constantly learning new things like digital media trends, cryptocurrencies. He's an omnivore, loves Indian and ancient medieval paintings, also industrial art, and is keenly interested in heritage vehicles. Ina, you might have some commonality with him at some stage if you get into a conversation. Dr. Debashish Dotto has a whole line of degrees behind him: MD, DNB, FRCP, Director, Department of Gastroenterology and Hepatology at Fortis Hospitals in Calcutta. What I loved about his response when I asked him, what is the greatest feeling of happiness? What do you really value? And he said, the joy to tell a patient you can go home, or to tell the patient you're free of cancer. His children's success and achievements, and he's fascinated by stories and historical books. We have Dr. Gautam Kastagir, who I think I might be not wrong or off the mark, Gautam, that you knew my father and you were a student of my father's, were you?
Yes, that's absolutely correct. He was one of the clients, one of our teachers who inspired us to do this discipline, obstetrics and gynecology.
Right, because Gautam, as we know, is FRCS and an FRCOG from London, which is a rare honor. And my father held that degree with a great deal of pride. He's the director, birth, gynoscopy and well-being. He's chairperson of Birth Inspire Foundation. His favorite Hollywood stars are Harrison Ford, Anthony Hopkins, Bruce Willis, all of mine too. He loves traditional Bengali cuisine and is particularly fond of the songs of Hemanta Mukhopadhyay and Konika Bandyopadhyay, Rabindra Sangeet in general. Ina Puri, friend of my youth, we were in a master's degree program together at Jadavpur University. She's a luminary as art curator, art critic, art aficionado, art collector, author, curator, documentary filmmaker on Manjeet Bawa and Shiv Kumar Sharma. She's a Rajat Kamal awardee, books on Parish Maiti, Raghu Rai, Nimai Ghosh are pretty well known, and a heap of other things. She's made an impact today, and she's all over the Telegraph, splashed because of the Emami art show that she brought to Calcutta, and which is running, Ina, till the 28th on Manjeet Bawa's cutouts.
MF Hussain.
Sorry. Yes, MF Hussain. I keep mixing it up because you've written on Bawa too. So yes, looking forward to Ina's contribution, which will surely be quite refreshing and unique, because art has been one of the upwardly mobile trends in the age of Corona. I'd also like to introduce Olivia Carr, well-traveled, first 12 years spent in Bahrain, then came back to Kolkata International School, went to McGill University, so a fellow Canadian connection there at Montreal, and then worked for the R&D group at Henkel Corporation. She started a baking business, that's how I came to know her, and makes the most yummy pecan tarts, all manner of cakes and sandwiches. She loves spending time with family and friends, and she enjoys the freedom to be creative. I've asked Olivia to share her very personal stories about coming back to India. Was it 2 years ago, Olivia?
Yes, it was.
And as if it wasn't hard enough to acculturate after so many years away, her mother-in-law, whom she was very fond of and who encouraged her in her new business of baking, passed away with COVID very suddenly. So she's managed that part. And she herself and her husband were diagnosed for COVID a few weeks ago, perhaps, and she's recovered or recovering. My last panelist, who I'm very proud of and who I welcome on board, is the youngest member today. She's Raka Mukherjee. Despite having COVID, she battled COVID. She battled COVID with her whole family. And she still got a standing at Calcutta University in Masters in English. So hats off to her. There were many times when I thought that, is she going to make it or not? So I'm particularly thankful that she's here with us, and she's gung-ho and she's all there. Now, before we start our discussion, I'm going to have to be bad cop and just say to our attendees that we welcome you with open arms. We will have a chance to let you share your stories, but while the panel discussion is going on, it would be great if you keep yourselves muted, and then I'll open up the floor and we can have a really feisty and memorable time, if that's all right with everyone. So thank you very much. The way I've envisaged this is what seems to work quite well, and I've checked it out with some of you, if this idea works for you. So I put forth a question on the table, and then very short, brief, to the point, maybe a minute for the answer, and then we move from one person to the other, and then I throw you another question and then see how you answer that. Ina, do you think that works?
Very well, very well.
Okay, so let's go with the first question I had in mind. And that would be, as Corona came into your life, in whatever way, whether it was personally, whether it was professionally, whether it was a member of your family, what was your reaction to encountering this pandemic? Fear, threat, calmness, how did you combat it? So will Dr. Gautam Kastgir go first?
Thank you, Julie. Basically, it came as a shock to me as a professional, because I was shocked that how I'm going to continue the treatment of those people who are halfway through. Those ladies who are already pregnant, how are we going to deliver them? Because our staff couldn't come. So we had to arrange special transport for them. And it was surprising that in the initial 2 months, although we were treating just the emergency essentials, eventually majority of the patients we were treating, they are infertile patients. So to some, it's not a disease. It's like a situation. And still they would want to have their treatment because there's such a desire to have a child. They were happy to take the risk of corona. So we were initially shocked how we were going to face it, but we realized that this situation put us in a unique position where people were more benevolent, people were more helpful, and they were not taking leave with the excuse. They were rather happy to come to the clinic. So this was so it was a positive, it wasn't a negative. And myself and Aparna both got infected, but both of us were asymptomatic. So it was rather, considering our age and other comorbidities, I was admitted in the hospital, but I was just reading books. I took my laptop and people were asking me, why are you here? And I said, because you guys wanted me in the hospital, because that's why I'm here. So really, Corona didn't put me through any shocking experience that you have been quoting, like a family loss. And not even a single patient died in our clinic in last 2 years.
Well, Lady Luck has been with you, Gautam. That is absolutely marvelous. Let's move over to Debashish. Debashish, what was your encounter with Corona?
My experience was slightly different from Gautam Das. You see, I work in a hospital where I had to go every day. I wanted to go, of course. And it was a mixture of emotions. First of all, is one anxiety. We were afraid. I think doctors are usually not afraid. But what was happening, we were all very scared because we did not know what we were dealing with. It was a scary time. So it's an uncertainty, not knowing what's going to happen. We were worried about our patients, of course. We were worried about our relatives, and we could see the sort of dismal situation all over. There was also a lot of grief, Julie. I think we all know, a lot of loved ones, and it happened in the first wave. I still remember one of our registrars died with diabetes and CKD. We were helpless. We just saw him die. But there was also moments of happiness. I still remember a patient, if I may briefly say, was a gynecology obstetric patient, and I was dealing with it because she had liver issues, and they had to have an emergency operation. And the relief we had when the patient and the baby went home was, so it was a mixture of emotions, but it was a really tough time.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Debashish, I'm going to push you guys with the next question. Just have it in your mind. What are the greatest challenges you felt that you encountered during this time? So moving on, let me ask Dr. Nandini Ray. Nandini, what was your encounter like? You were frontline. We don't realize that. But as an ophthalmologist, you were literally inches away from people who came to your clinic. You know, how did you deal with that?
Good evening, Julie. Thank you so much for having me. Wishing all of you a great evening ahead of discussions. Now, when actually the lockdown was announced, it all came sort of very suddenly. And my feelings were those of sort of disbelief. We didn't really want to actually realize what had hit us. And at the clinic at Fortis and at Radiant, we thought we'd probably just, the initial lockdown was 15 days. And we actually thought, okay, so we'll shut doors for about 15 days and we're all going to come back to work after 15 days. Obviously, we were worried about the people that I had operated on. I hadn't been able to see them, follow up and things like that. But, we didn't have an option. We tried to give them sort of instructions over the phone and things like that. But I think my immediate headache was obviously, how do I deal with the members of staff at home, like looking after my sort of rather immobile mother who suffers from dementia. We have 3 people, 12-hourly shifts, so there are about 6 people. So 3 of them said that they just couldn't come because trains, buses, everything, every form of transport had shut down. So we suddenly had 3 extra members of staff, and the 2 members of staff who used to come and go looking after us and the household, not just my mother, they too lived a little further away. So we suddenly had 5 extra members of staff. So unlike sort of isolation that people keep talking about, I mean, it was like a bit of a circus at home. It was me, my husband, my 2 children who were also locked down, so as to say. They were home, so we were 4 of us, my mother, and suddenly we had 5 extra members of staff who had suddenly become, full-time. So that was quite a headache in a way. It had its ups and it had its downs, and it needed a lot of managerial skills. And as far as getting back to work after those 2.5 months, yes, we were certainly frontline. I remember going to work the first day. I was apprehensive, because of all the cases. The numbers hadn't really come down, but then we realized that there were organizations to be run, there were clinics to be run. I had to see my post-op patients, not just the week before, but also, we have to keep on following them up. So the first day I went back to work, I remember I was wearing 3 masks. I was wearing, I don't wear glasses for long distance. I was wearing sort of plastic eye goggles, a face shield. I was wearing gloves. I was wearing 2 caps. I was wearing sort of shoe shields or whatever you call them. I mean, I was looking like a NASA astronaut without the thrill. And I couldn't breathe. I really couldn't breathe. I remember one of my first photographs, and I look back on those days and I think that, oh my God. And then we were actually quite literally within 3 inches of the patient at the CPAP. We were advised not to operate on cataracts, which is essentially most of the work that I do, because of the aerosol spray which emanates from a phaco. So initially, even after going back to work, I went back to clinic, but I didn't go back to operating, which I missed. And even the very sort of, I don't deal with emergency cases, but there are cases where we can't wait. So we went back to those cases very, very carefully. And, even the atmosphere inside the OT was, it was not the usual things which, flowed, going in and going out sort of within 10 minutes, you've done a case. But, we were waiting for about 20 minutes in between patients. there were very few patients in the first instance. And even the clinics, it was very strange. It was back to square one, back to 1996 days, the year when I first came back, and I was hoping to get patients and not getting patients. It was, back to those days where you had about 5 patients waiting outside and sort of 1 patient for, every half an hour of clinic time, which was.
So what was happening is that it was bad for business.
Yes, bad for business. Certainly. Yes, definitely. The first 6 months. Yes.
Okay. So we come back to you later in a bit, Nandini. So think about the challenges that were foremost in your profession or in your life. Gurudash, may we have the PowerPoint, please? Thank you. Okay, so the second slide, please. So this is Anjana. We lost her. Just wanted to come back and show you the slide. Next one, please, Gurudash. Okay, so over to you, Ina. As we can see, you are splashed all over the papers this morning in the Telegraph with MF Hussein's exhibition of essential forms, cutouts. What would be your reaction, Ina? Let me know, do you want to see the images that you've given me?
Yeah, bye.
Do you want to see them now or later?
Or later, you can just play them later. But what I want to say was that thank you, of course, for inviting me, Julie. It's wonderful to be part of this panel. But what happened to us was we had COVID, both Ravi and I and our staff, we were all down with COVID, but at different points of time. So it was different times and different phases. And my mother-in-law, of course, had COVID and then she passed. So on various levels, we had to cope with what was happening around us and to us personally. But what worked was that we didn't give up hope. I live in Gurgaon and in a community that reached out to other people through the pandemic. So I was down myself, but there were others out there working with gurdwaras, with NGOs, and we were doing our best. If we couldn't go out there ourselves, we were trying to reach money, send packets of food. And that way we felt very involved with what was happening in the city, in the community. Not just within the art world, many artists and their families were doing very poorly. They were going through a very hard time because, when you're isolating without meeting anyone, it is a very, very difficult time. But somehow what happened was people were reaching out. We were more in touch during the pandemic than ever before. And that was wonderful to be able to do things for people. And I think the Amphan cyclone hit perhaps in the first part, and sitting in my room in my home in Laburnum, I organized a fundraiser where I involved foundations and artists, and we raised a very handsome.
Yes, I remember that. I remember that, Tina.
Gave it to Ramakrishna Mission Kolkata from here online. Everything was happening online and virtually. But we were able to do that because everyone wanted to do something. Some artists just gave works and said, no question of, charging or taking any money from this. It's fine. Just, we are donating the works. And through sales, we were able to raise money and then give it to Ramakrishna Mission. I went to Belur Mott much after the pandemic just to meet them and to tell them that this is what we were able to do. And it was wonderful interacting with them. But through the pandemic, this is what we did to make ourselves useful.
So in other words, you seem to be saying to me and to us that it really wasn't a fearful situation. Do you think it was also because you could turn that fear and anxiety, lucky for you, that you didn't lose anybody really close? Although
I did.
Your mother-in-law.
No, did. And my sister-in-law was extremely unwell. She was hospitalized. My brother-in-law was hospitalized. But the only way to cope with this, I myself am diabetic, so I wasn't doing so well. Ravi, with his age, and he was coughing constantly. It was very worrying. But the only way to keep sane was to work. And I was extremely worried and fearful because my little granddaughter is only 2 years old and she was far away in Hyderabad. The only way I could keep sane was to get up in the morning and, to set myself these tasks. These things need to be done. These are the people I have to reach out to, and face each day, in that way without losing hope. And news was constantly coming in, friends, hospital or worse.
Thanks, Ina. Okay, so Olivia, if I can ask you, with the floodgates being opened with Corona in your life, what was it like, your first encounter when you found out that your mother-in-law had contrived this disease?
So when she first got diagnosed with COVID, when we got her report back, she was already at the hospital. Before she went into the hospital, she was at home for a few days with running a high fever, but she was convinced that it wasn't COVID at the time. This was in May of last year. She would say that there's a change of weather, and this happens to me every time around this time. But when she started complaining that she's not able to taste food, she's lost her sense of smell, we were suspecting that it was COVID. And then we decided to send her to the hospital just as a precautionary measure. And she agreed. The idea was for her to go for a couple of days. We noticed that her saturation was fluctuating at home between 90 and 95. So we thought, let's just send her to the hospital and she can get some oxygen treatment and come back home. But I don't think any of us thought that, she wouldn't come back to us from the hospital. So within a matter of days, things started going downhill. The first few days in the hospital, she seemed to be fine. She seemed, she was recovering. She was starting to get her sense of smell and taste back. She was very active, and she would video call us every day, twice a day. So we were hopeful that she would be back home within a few days. And then a couple of days later, I think she realized, like you said, Dr. Mehta, she also told us that she's not able to breathe. She's gasping for air. And at that time, she knew that she wasn't going to make it. So she very clearly, and she was very clear-headed about this. She very clearly told us that, I'm not going to make it. You have to prepare yourselves for all eventualities. And a few days later, she went on the ventilator and she didn't come back. So still, in some ways, it's very difficult for us to accept this reality. And it's been 9 months now. So yesterday was our 9-month death anniversary. But every single birthday or anniversary or festival has been very difficult without her, because she used to be a very integral part of those events. And in some ways, we're still coping with this very big loss.
I always think about your Shoshul Mashai, and that sort of, in a different way, rings many bells for me. So how is that working out? Is he, because that must be very hard at that age to lose a life partner so unexpectedly.
Yeah, very, very unexpected. They were married for 42 years. They had been dating 10 years before that. So they've known each other for 52 years. And I think in a way, I think he's been coping with it a lot better than I had expected. But obviously it's hard, and especially, some days you miss her more than others. So he's been keeping himself engaged. He has a good network of friends and family that check up on him. And I'm glad that my husband and I are here with him during this time, because I'm glad we moved when we moved, just so we could be here and support him during this very difficult time.
Yeah, the universe has a plan. And
Yeah.
you just have to stay the course and have the faith, I guess. Great story there. Thank you for sharing, Olivia. Raka, how did you feel when you first realized that, yes, it is Corona, and yes, your MA finals are around the corner? And how did you react to that?
Well, frankly, I was in denial for the first time I was diagnosed with COVID, because I had been isolating myself and been in my home, and I had COVID during the Delta wave, that is the second wave last year. Throughout 2020, I had utilized the lockdown. I had read 40 books, finished reading 40 books in the lockdown. And I say this to everyone, that when COVID was first introduced to us, I had utilized the entire year, and I did not really feel that I would ever get it, because I was always in my room. I did not even step out of the house for groceries. It was all online. And then suddenly one day, I know that I'm coughing and I have symptoms and I have fever. And when I finally found out how I got COVID, it was because of my father's profession. As many of the panelists and the audience members do not know, my father is an actor. So when they have to act, they have to remove their masks in front of the camera. And despite of all kinds of measures, we were diagnosed, and he was asymptomatic, and my mother got it first, and from my mother I got it. And then the second challenge was to hide the fact from my grandparents, who are very old, and they were in the ground floor and we were on the top floor. And we had to isolate ourselves and not tell them, because both of them, my grandfather is in his 84, 83, 84 age range, and my grandmother is in her late 70s, and both of them would panic. And also my maternal grandparents, who are in Howrah, they are also of the same age range, and they would not be able to cope with the fact that we have been diagnosed with COVID. And at that time, missing classes and my body not allowing me to get up to attend the classes. I remember we were reading Kim during that time, and we had engaging conversations in class and presentations with you. And when I told you that, ma'am, I think I have COVID, you had told me, Raka, don't come to class, don't attend classes. And suddenly I felt that, okay, this has happened to me, and my body is not listening to my brain. And the day I lost my sense of taste, I realized how we take for granted each and every sense we have: the sense of smell, the sense of taste, the sense of vision. And that is when I realized that my chicken is tasting like rubber. And I was scared. I was scared that I might not get back my sense of taste again, because I had heard by then stories of people not recovering their taste of smell and sense of smell and taste completely after post-COVID. And I was constantly coughing. Even if I had to, we had a Bengal Club book club meeting a month after I recovered from COVID. And I had told you, ma'am, I'm sorry, I won't be able to speak because I'm still coughing. I'm coughing after every word. And at the very same time, we had received news of 3 of our close relatives, our family doctor, who was in his mid-30s, Dr. Aniket Niyogi, and uh, our very close relative and a father of a friend of mine who had passed away due to this disease. So to balance with the grief of losing loved ones, to balance with the mental state of my body not listening to me, and to still manage to hide it from my grandparents until and unless we have recovered, it has been a pandemonium at home. And the only thing that gave me a sense of hope was tuning into classes, lying down, putting on my earphone, and listening to the discussions, even if I knew that I could not participate. And when I had to write my exams, I had recovered from COVID, I think 2 months before that, before we had our semester exams. And I think when God gives you challenges, God also gives you the power to overcome them. Sometimes you do not know how you manage to go through situations. And that is what had happened to me. And ma'am, I'm very thankful because of you, because of all the teachers in the university who had been so empathetic and who had actually, because not just me, all I think out of 32 girls in our class, there were, I mean, 18 or if I'm not sure, I think 18 of them had COVID at one point or the other before the exams. And still we all managed to write our exams in the online mode, which was also a new challenge to overcome. And yeah, I think what I take back is that the day I stepped out of the house after that, I was so grateful that I can smell, I can taste, I can breathe, and I can speak without coughing. So
Thank you, Raka. Thank you. I think you've put things in perspectives with your insight as a young person, and how life for us, I think all those of us who are on this panel, was much easier than it is going to be for your generation. And you've stepped up to the plate. That's wonderful. Okay, so if it's all right, my next question to you, and if we can now have shorter and sharper conversations now that we know the contextual instances of everyone here. Very quickly, what was the one challenge that you really had to combat when you were aware that, yes, Corona is here, this is what I have to do? And what was that one challenge and how did you overcome it? Debashish, will you start first then?
Yes, as a doctor, Julie, the main challenge, as I mentioned, was how do you treat your patients? So you see, doctors are usually not afraid of treating patients. I think most of us will know how to deal and handle patients. But this was one scenario. It was completely an unknown territory. I used to go to the hospital. I am not an ICU doctor. As you know, I'm a gastroenterologist, hepatologist, but I had to get involved with a lot of patients having liver and GI issues. The question there was, how do you treat these people? We knew only oxygen would work and nothing else. Later, we found out that steroids works and other medications slowly came up. So the real challenge was how to treat. And you won't believe there were so many meetings, Zoom calls in Calcutta, in India, around the world, trying to find a solution. Slowly we got there, but that was the main challenge as a doctor. How to get these patients home?
Absolutely, absolutely. Nandini, would you like to jump in here very quickly?
Very quickly, I think on the professional front, Julie, the main challenge that I had was, how to actually see patients at such close quarters without getting infected. Everybody did not have an RT-PCR test, sort of telling us that they were COVID negative for what it's worth. And secondly, the first 10 operations that I did, you see, I looked through a microscope, and I was wearing goggles. On top of that, I was wearing a face shield, and that added an artificial 1.5 inches between my eye and the microscope eyepiece. So that itself led to a lot of focusing problems and a lot of steaming up. So I still remember where I almost feel that I can, pardon the pun, do a cataract operation blindfolded. I mean, I was stopping, and there would be an assistant trying to clean up my the microscope, the fogging area, my sort of eye specs. I kept taking it off. There was finding a sweet spot as to where to keep those, glasses perched on the mask, above the mask, below the mask, what to sort of, tape up and things like that. So there was a lot of toing and froing. Each operation took a long time. We had the thing that, there'd be aerosols in there. So we spent about 45 minutes waiting for the aerosols to settle in between two operations. So I almost felt it was like much ado about nothing, but it was a real challenge operating in the operating theater.
I always think, even when you see your patients just come to see you, Nan, it's like they're in your face.
Absolutely.
So
yes.
how do how do you keep yourself away from the infection point? Wonderful, wonderful. I think Debashish and you have both made excellent points. Gautam, let's turn to you. What was the greatest challenge?
My challenge was during the corona epidemic, not everyone was getting infected. So we were told that when the patients come to the clinic, you screen them and do an RT-PCR test. If that's negative, you start the treatment. So when we started the treatment finishes in about 2 to 3 weeks time. Now, when they take all these expensive drugs, they do all the monitoring, they are hyped up, they are going to get success. And when the treatment is about to complete or just the final step, we need to do the test again because they will go inside the operating theater where they're in close contact and we use anesthesia. So obviously the anesthetists are at risk, OT staff are at risk. So on the day before surgery, if the test comes positive, then you are at a great loss. They have done everything right. They have responded to the treatment, but you cannot complete. And that becomes so sad. And often it happens, the husband is positive, the wife is negative. And so much frustration. So that was a great challenge. And the second challenge I had, which you will be all laughing if you hear this. Can you imagine the pregnancy rate actually increased during the time of corona epidemic? Because people were actually staying at home. So they are spending more time together.
Yes.
So a significant proportion of our couple who come to us, they have a social reason of not getting pregnant. Just imagine. So, when the corona period, we were expecting we were working less. So we were having lots of phone calls. By the way, doctor, I was not having my treatment because of corona, but lo and behold, my test is positive. Now you cannot tell them, no, you terminate the pregnancy. You have to give them the service. So our workload actually increased, but we were delighted that people realized that by spending good time together, which corona forced us to do, we can actually solve many problems. And many of our patients actually develop new hobbies and they go through huge stress. So their stress level actually came down. We were astonished that many of them started developing art or singing or writing as a time pass, sort of thing. And the stress of not getting pregnant was actually much lower, and that also helped. So this was rather a good news, also bad news. The first one was a bad news, we couldn't complete the treatment. And the second was good news, that they were getting success even without the treatment.
I think it's very interesting how you could, as a doctor, very perceptive that it's staying at home together in isolation, that it worked. But for many people, as we know, Gautam, there were cases with some of my ex-students in Jadavpur where there was so much domestic abuse that they had to get another place for this girl to stay, whose brother, for instance, was physically just beating her up because they're not used to being together in a closed space. But this is very interesting. I mean, it adds a bit of a humorous texture to our discussion today. So, Ina, if I can turn to you, taking the baton from Dr. Karstagir, how would you say the art market, the art world in our country, with which you're so familiar, how has it worked during Corona times?
Well, initially, I think all of us were completely flabbergasted, shocked, didn't know how to cope with it. But very, very soon, I think people just, rethought and just decided that they have to go ahead. And therefore, artists were creating fabulous works at home because they were spending time in their studios, not socializing, traveling. And it was incredibly exciting because, for instance, the Jayashree Barman show that I have just done, curated in Delhi at the Bikaner House. It's a fabulous show. But this whole body of work was created during the pandemic. And Jayashree has, brought in so much. The subject of Ganga was what this exhibition was all about. It was an ode to Ganga. But alongside the mythical story, Joystree also brought in the bodies that were floating in the Ganga and these other stories. So the pandemic did affect, of course. I mean, working long distance with an artist, it's crazy because you have to look at the colors, you have to decide how you want to show the works, arrange the exhibition, all of that. But, the main thing was that the artists were working and we were speaking to each other all the time. And the moment it was safe, for us to visit studios and to interact personally, we did that. But a lot of terrific work happened. Jatin Das opened an exhibition, for instance, and I was in conversation with him about the the migrants, the people, that whole story of migration that affected almost every creative person I know. And from Delhi, there were these streams of people walking with children, bundles on their back, kids, little girls. So this whole story, this whole narrative of the migration, for instance, came alive. I think artists were working, in their own different ways. But here, the sudden synergy, people came together and said, yes, this is what I felt. Migration affected me. This person went to Orissa. That family went off to Bhubaneswar.
Ina, if I can just cut in and ask you for a minute. Nandini Dr. Nandini Ray went to an exhibition recently by Shubha Prasanna. And that was also very topical. In my mind, it was very akin to several works that were shown in Rome, also in Germany and in New York. What does Corona mean? Did you have a look at any of Shubha Prasanna's? What did you think, Ina?
I've been working with Shubha Prasanna for a long time. He's such a wonderful scene artist. So, this is something which Shubhada responded, and the work is completely, it's magnificent because it's a very unique look at this, at the pandemic, at Corona, and he's visualizing it in a certain way. Earlier on, when we were working on his book, for instance, the symbol of the night birds, when he's talking about night and the city, for instance, there are many other stories that come into play. And here, instead of making it some kind of a symbol or anything, he's directly taking on the subject, and he's saying, this is what it is, it means to me. This is how I.
Thank you, Ina. Gurudash, it would be wonderful if we can please do two things. One is, first we will hear Dr. Shondeep Chatterjee, the brilliant neurosurgeon, one of the proprietors of Park Nursing Home. He has written a poem which has been published. Could we hear his recitation of his poem on the Corona and loss and light and dark? Can't hear, Gurudash.
Just a minute, ma'am.
Okay. Pradeep, I hope you're around. Mr. Pradeep Gupta, you have the best story, I think, a personal story. So after we hear Dr. Chatterjee's poetry, I will be turning to you, Pradeep. I hope you'll give us a 9-yard ballpark.
I would like to take this opportunity to thank Julie Mehta for giving me an opportunity to read before you one of my amateur poems, which I conceived of on the night when one of my classmates lost his mother due to COVID in our hospital. The poem is called Darkness or Light. It has now been published in the International Journal of Neuro-Oncology in the December 2021 edition. Darkness or light. When the night sky flashed its warning knell, she looked at you in pride as well. And one last time, you saw the face of the lady you called mother. And then that first smile you ever saw became all still as is the law, and you knew the virus had claimed another victim. Yet you could not cry, because there were still other lives to try and save, those that trusted you, who needed help in their distress, because you were still a doctor. And all the pride which you had taken, and all the efforts you did make to reach a status which you felt did matter, seemed as distant like the thunder. For you were left to douse the forest flames, after the powerful lit their glory games and dropped the burning logs onto the grass so they could night their halo. And when the forest was all aflame, they hinted you were to blame and left you the fire to tame, as they did regain their fame, for you were still a doctor. When knowledge seemed to ensure claim and learning science did ensure fame, you thought of power you had to treat sick and lame, but alas, where was the chance? True power they had who ignored you, for science favors but the few. The larger lot with fixed beliefs were led to their destruction. They taunted what you had said and tainted all that you had read. They left you to solve the tragedy of their creation. For you were still the doctor. And because you caused no noise and never spoke in one clear voice, they even made you work for free to push their success story. Alas, what use is knowledge thus, when those in power make all the fuss and leave you aflame and uncared for within the man-made inferno? They listened not to what you had said and trampled on what you had read. They left you midst the dying and dead, for you were just a doctor. They that did drag you to court and painted your misdeeds to note and shamed you well to hide their blame and slandered well your name, now felt you had to save the grass and alone douse the fire. And yes, your mother's face did beam in pride at her son's dream, at those final moments which taunt at our imaginations. But how many mothers may in future pray and in their dreams but say, thank God he's not a doctor. Thank you.
Oh. I think a good story in the wake would be Mr. Pradeep Gupta's relating his own experience with COVID. Pradeep, go ahead. I'm not going to ask you one question. I have 100 questions, but you met COVID face to face and you're back with us. Can you tell us what it was like?
Thank you for your kind invitation. It's indeed inspiring listening to all the speakers earlier, and of course Shandeep's poem, which is so precious to me. I had my COVID life was spent between March of 2019 to January 2020 to January of 2021. These 8-9 months were quite different. My parents fell sick. My dad's 90, my mother's 78. And they were hospitalized at Park Clinic, and but all non-COVID. And for some reason, we hoped and hoped that the virus was passing us by. And then suddenly the head of our joint family, my Jetima, suddenly passed away from COVID. A very close friend, Geeta, who headed the Hope Foundation, passed away from COVID. And above all, my precious beloved teacher, Hari Vasudevan, passed away from COVID. And then you suddenly realize that you have bullets flying within inches of your head and you're still safe. And then January of last year happened, and I found myself in an ICU in Medica, and my wife was equally sick at home. So I'm very lucky. I have really nice friends. So there was Shandeep and Dr. Sujata Majumdar from the Park Clinic looking after my wife at home. And there was Dr. Kunal Sarkar and Ovirol Ray looking after me at Medica. I mean, we passed through a terrible time, and all I can say is that I sort of went into some sort of a sleep on the evening of 19th of January. And when I woke up next, it was the morning of the 23rd. I don't know what happened to me, but those few days were lost to me forever. But it was an awakening. You see, I've had a very peculiar relationship with COVID because my MPhil thesis was on the Great Depression of the last century. And one of the preconditions of the Great Depression of the last century was the Spanish flu and pandemic of the 20th century. And of course, when the lockdown happened, I bored just about everybody, telling them how the pandemic of the 20th century had led to the Great Depression and whether we're going to have a repeat in the 21st century and this and that. And all the while, as I said, like a fool, I thought that it can't happen to me. It won't happen to me because I'm taking every precaution. Of course, it happens to all of us. It happened to me in a rather perverse, violent way. I'm very, very glad that so many people escaped without any major damage or setback. But I thought that, a pandemic will lead to a depression, and being an economic writer, that sort of thing agitated me a lot more. And in the first phase, I had not acquired the stillness that I learned to acquire once I was sick. I realized then two lines came back to me. One is by Steve Jobs. Live every day of your life as if it's the last, because one day you will certainly be right. I mean, that's more true than it ever was. And the second thing is that the quality of life is perhaps a lot more important than the quantity. This is something that Kunal, Shandip, and I talk about all the time. So then I sort of reset my life. I acquired a piano and attempted to learn it, drove my family mad and stopped after a short while. I took apart my vintage car, which is a 1931 Baby Austin, destroyed it half, and then got about gallivanting about town. My good friend Devashish Dotto is smiling because I used to send him pictures of all the sweets I was buying at Bolaram Mollik. And he would always point out that in the reflection, there's a man with a largish pawn, choose that. And that, of course, was me. So, between that, it was a dramatic change. I think acquiring that stillness was very important to understand what really matters and to understand that while loss is inevitable, the sort of experience you feel afterwards, the loss is very different. And it was poignantly borne out to me by two incidents while at hospital. I remember Kunal coming over one day and said, you know what, we've had a long innings from 1981 in College Street. Now don't spoil the innings. You're trying your level best. Huh? Fight very hard so that, we can continue. And then he said one more line. Oh, I have to tell you, I've asked your son to come down from Delhi. I said, yeah, I know what that means. So thank you. And, once I woke up and I remembered these lines, I understood how important it is to actually, as I said, understand that every day in your life should matter to you in some way or the other. And second is, you have to be very active and very still at the same time. Otherwise, you lurch from incident to incident without meaning, a lot of activity masquerading as achievement. And that's perhaps not what you want to do. So that's all I have to say. And I really miss, from Hari Vasudevan to my Jetima and all the friends I've lost, Geeta, Shobik Ghosh, who used to edit Kolkata on Wheels. Of course, I miss them intensely, but I also treasure all those who I still have around me a lot more than perhaps I very undeservedly did before that. Everybody at that time, without this loss, we would not have valued everybody else as much as we value my friends that I see on screen and elsewhere. My only worry, of course, is whether we will slip back into our callousness. And that is, I think, the biggest post-COVID fight, to realize that we should not become what we were. We should actually try to be what was taught to us in these few years, in this harsh lesson. So that's it. Thank you.
Wonderful, Pradeep. Just cannot tell you how much that resonates, because last night I was having a conversation just with our very own Bengal Club librarian, Shibonti, who had COVID. She's a single woman. And the challenges, she said, was surmounted by turning within. So when you talk about centering, I can make sense of that. Because she says that there was a way in which she could look at herself, she could understand herself, she had time to actually get in touch with that core, which we all don't want to deal with, right? On a daily basis, as you were saying, the activity, the goals, the ambitions, we hardly ever have that moment of stillness. And I think it's this introspection, this feeling of hope is what I'm hearing from all of you. And you have said it better than anyone else, because you've been there and you've come back, Pradeep. I'd like to say a very big thank you to everyone here. I'm really happy we've got two youngsters, I would say, who've given their views as well. And I want us to end with a song which Digonto Chaudhary, well-known classical Western music teacher, player, has been always kind to Bengal Club Library Committee. He really indulged us with the requests I put to him last time, if you all remember, during the Shakespeare event, and he sang those beautiful songs from Othello and Hamlet. So Digonto, if you're here, it would be a great honor for us to listen to your wonderful ensemble with Anuruddha Das and Julius Howard, Rit Gupto, Digonto yourself, all budding songwriters, lyricists, and you who's a stalwart in Kolkata. Thanks to Diku Meher Nauroji. Again, when you want to do something and it's good, the universe comes in different ways to help you. When I was conceptualizing this, I'm just out of the blue, we had a conversation, and Meher Nauroji, also a member of this club, said, hey, do you know your old friend Digonto? You can ask him, he's planning to do Abide With Me for a platform. And I said, what could be better than to end this program with Digonto's ensemble? Thank you so much, everyone. Digonto, go for it. Gurudash, have you got it? This is Digonto. Thank you so much, Digonto. Thank you. Gurudash, have you got that with you?
Shall I play the
Yes, please.
music?
Please, thank you.
When
Nandini, Debashish, Pradeep, Shondeep, Ina, Raka, Olivia, all of you, Gautam, how can I thank you for being such wonderful storytellers? Thank you for the stories. Thank you for sharing. And thanks to all the attendees. Really appreciate that we're all together. And small though this group was, I think it was very meaningful. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for the opportunity,
Thank you.
ma'am.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Julie.
Stay safe, everyone. All the
Thank
best.
you.
Thanks to the President, Ambarish Dashgupta, and the Chair, Dr. Shondeep Chatterjee, for indulging this idea and making it happen. Thank you, guys. Good night. Good night. Stay safe.
Right, everybody.
Night, everybody. Thank you, ma'am.